If you love heartwarming stories that restore your faith in humanity, make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss another inspiring moment like this. 1. The morning sun casts golden rays across the cobblestone streets of London as thousands of tourists gathered along the palace gates. Among the crowd stood 7-year-old Emma Mitchell, clutching her father's hand tightly while her eyes fixed on the magnificent royal guards standing at attention. She had dreamed of this moment for months, ever since her parents promised her a trip to see the famous guards in their tall bearskin hats and bright red uniforms. Emma's father, David, smiled down at his daughter's excited face. She had been talking non-stop about the guards during their entire flight from Australia. Her mother, Sarah, snapped photos as they moved closer to the gates, trying to capture the perfect shot of Emma with the guards in the background. The little girl had worn her favorite red dress for the occasion, convinced it would help her blend in with the guards' uniforms. As they approached the nearest guard, Emma noticed something that made her heart skip. The guard, a tall man with kind eyes barely visible beneath his bearskin cap, stood perfectly still like a statue. But Emma saw something others missed. A single tear rolled down his cheek, glistening in the morning light before disappearing into his collar. The guard's jaw remained set, his posture unchanged. But that tear told a story of hidden pain. Most tourists walked past without noticing, too busy taking selfies and laughing with their families. Children ran around making silly faces at the guards, trying to get them to break their famous composure. Parents called out to their kids, warning them not to get too close. Street vendors sold miniature guard figurines and postcards nearby. The usual chaos of a tourist attraction swirled around them, but Emma stood frozen, her small hand still wrapped in her father's. Something deep inside Emma stirred. She had always been a sensitive child, the kind who cried when she saw sad movies or brought home injured birds to nurse back to health. Her teachers often commented on her unusual empathy for someone so young. At school, she was the first to comfort a crying classmate or share her lunch with someone who forgot theirs. Her parents had taught her to be kind, to notice when others were hurting, and to never ignore someone in pain. David felt his daughter's hand tighten around his fingers. He looked down and saw her staring intently at the guard. Before he could ask what was wrong, Emma tugged on his sleeve. Her voice was barely a whisper, but the concern in it was unmistakable. She told her father she thought the guard was sad, that she had seen him crying even though he was trying to hide it. David glanced at the guard, seeing only the stern, professional exterior that everyone else saw. Sarah joined them, asking what was happening. David explained that Emma thought the guard was upset, but Sarah gently reminded their daughter that the guards were trained to stand still, no matter what happened around them. It was their job, their duty to the Queen and country. The tear Emma saw might have been sweat or just her imagination playing tricks in the bright sunlight. But Emma shook her head firmly, her brown eyes serious beyond her years. The little girl had made up her mind about something, though she had not yet spoken it aloud. She watched the guard for another long moment, studying his face with an intensity that surprised her parents. Other families continued to stream past, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding. A tour guide nearby explained the history of the royal guards to a group of American tourists. His voice rising above the general chatter, Emma finally spoke, her voice quiet but determined. She wanted to do something to help the guard feel better. Her parents exchanged worried glances, uncertain about what their daughter had in mind. They knew that approaching the guards too closely or trying to distract them from their duties was frowned upon. There were rules, boundaries that tourists were expected to respect. David knelt down to Emma's level, ready to explain why they could not interrupt the guards' work. But before he could speak, Emma reached into her small backpack, the one covered in butterfly patches that she took everywhere. Her tiny fingers searched through the contents with purpose, looking for something specific. Sarah and David watched curiously as their daughter pulled out a small, worn teddy bear. It was her most treasured possession, a gift from her grandmother before she passed away 2 years earlier. Emma never went anywhere without it, and she had insisted on bringing it all the way from Australia to London. The teddy bear was small and brown, with one eye slightly loose, and patches where the fur had worn thin from countless hugs. Emma called him Mr. Buttons because of the shiny button sewn onto his chest. Her grandmother had given it to her during her last hospital visit, pressing it into Emma's hands and telling her that Mr. Buttons would always protect her and keep her brave. Since that day, the little bear had been Emma's constant companion through good times and bad. Sarah gasped softly when she saw what Emma was holding. She knew how much that bear meant to her daughter. David's eyes widened with surprise and concern. He asked Emma what she planned to do with Mr. Buttons, though he already sensed the answer. Emma looked up at her father with those serious, determined eyes and said she wanted to give the bear to the guard. She explained that Mr. Buttons always made her feel better when she was sad, and maybe he could help the guard too. David opened his mouth to protest, to explain all the reasons why this might not be allowed or appropriate. But something in his daughter's expression stopped him. He had never seen such conviction in her young face. Sarah placed a hand on her husband's shoulder, her own eyes misty with emotion. She whispered that maybe they should let Emma try, that sometimes the purest acts of kindness came from children who did not yet know all the rules about what they should not do. Emma did not wait for final permission. With Mr. Buttons clutched tightly in her small hands, she took a step forward, then another. Her parents followed close behind, ready to intervene if necessary. The guard remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead as his training demanded. He must have seen the little girl approaching in his peripheral vision, but he gave no sign of acknowledgement. Other tourists began to notice Emma walking toward the guard. Some stopped to watch with curiosity. The little girl's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept walking. When she reached the guard, she had to tilt her head back to look up at him. He seemed impossibly tall from her perspective, like a giant from one of her storybooks. For a moment, Emma hesitated, suddenly feeling very small and uncertain. The guard's red uniform was so bright and official, his bearskin cap so tall and imposing. She wondered if she had made a mistake, if she should turn back to the safety of her parents' arms. But then she saw it again. Another tear, sliding slowly down the guard's cheek. His face remained expressionless, but his eyes held a depth of sadness that Emma could feel in her own chest. She did not know what had made this man so sad, but she knew that feeling. She remembered how she felt when her grandmother died, how the world seemed darker and colder without her warm hugs and gentle stories. Emma remembered how Mr. Buttons had helped her through those dark nights when she missed her grandmother so much it hurt. With gentle movements, Emma reached up as high as she could. She was too short to reach the guard's hand, which remained firmly at his side. So instead, she carefully placed Mr. Buttons on the ground directly in front of the guard's polished black boots. She positioned the teddy bear so it sat upright, facing the guard, as if offering him a smile. Then Emma stepped back slightly, looked up at the guard's face, and did something that surprised everyone watching. She saluted. It was not a perfect military salute. Her small hand wobbled a bit and was not quite at the right angle, but the gesture was clear. Emma had seen people salute the guards in movies, and she wanted to show respect the way she thought soldiers did. After holding the salute for a few seconds, she lowered her hand and spoke. Her voice was soft but carried clearly in the sudden quiet that had fallen around them. Emma told the guard that she could see he was sad. She wanted him to know that everything would be okay. She said that Mr. Buttons was very special and always helped her feel better when she was upset. She explained that her grandmother had given him to her, and he was full of love and magic that made sad feelings go away. She hoped Mr. Buttons could help the guard feel better too, because nobody should have to be sad all alone, especially not someone as brave as a royal guard who stood all day protecting people. The crowd around them had gone silent. Parents held their children back, watching the scene unfold. Cameras remained forgotten at sides as people simply observed this moment of pure, innocent compassion. Sarah had tears streaming down her face, one hand pressed to her mouth. David blinked rapidly, fighting his own emotional response. Neither of them had expected their daughter to do something so beautiful, so selfless. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, nothing happened. The guard remained frozen in position, giving no indication that he had heard Emma's words or seen her gift. The little girl stood before him, waiting, hoping for some sign that her gesture had meant something. She did not need him to break his stance or speak to her. She just wanted to know that he understood, that he knew someone cared about his pain. Then something extraordinary happened. The guard's eyes, which had been staring straight ahead into the distance, shifted downward. It was the smallest movement, barely noticeable to anyone not paying close attention, but Emma saw it. The guard was looking at Mr. Buttons sitting at his feet. His jaw tightened slightly, and for a moment, it seemed like he might lose the composure that years of training had built. Another tear escaped, rolling down the same path as the others before it. Emma smiled up at him. A bright, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. She told him it was okay to be sad sometimes, that her mother always said crying was just love trying to find its way out. She promised she would come back for Mr. Buttons later, but for now, the guard could borrow him for as long as he needed. Then, with one final look at the teddy bear and the towering guard, Emma turned and walked back to her parents. David scooped his daughter into his arms, holding her tight. Sarah wrapped her arms around both of them, and for a moment, the three stood together in their own little bubble while the world continued around them. Other tourists began taking photos again, the spell broken, but Emma did not care about them. She looked back at the guard one more time, satisfied that she had done what her heart told her was right, as the Mitchell family stepped aside to let other tourists pass. Emma noticed people looking at her differently. Some smiled warmly, others whispered to their companions while glancing her way. An elderly woman approached them, her own eyes wet with tears, and told Emma she had done a beautiful thing. A young couple thanked her for reminding them what true kindness looked like. Emma accepted the praise with quiet grace, but her attention kept returning to the guard, wondering if Mr. Buttons was helping him feel better. What? Emma and her parents did not know was the story behind that guard's tears. His name was James Harrison, and he had been serving in the Royal Guard for 8 years. It was his dream job, something he had worked toward since he was a teenager. He had always been proud of his service, honored to stand watch over the palace and represent his country. But 3 weeks earlier, James had received news that shattered his world. His younger brother Michael had died in a car accident. Michael had been James's best friend, the person who knew him better than anyone else in the world. They had grown up together in a small town, getting into trouble and making memories that James treasured. When James joined the military, Michael had been his biggest supporter, attending his graduation ceremony and beaming with pride. Michael always joked that he had the cooler older brother, the one who got to wear the fancy uniform and stand guard at the palace. The funeral had been held. Just 5 days before Emma's visit, James had been granted leave to attend to say goodbye to the brother who had meant everything to him. Standing at the graveside watching them lower Michael's casket into the ground, James felt like part of himself was being buried too. He had cried then, letting out all the grief and pain in the privacy of his family's embrace. But when he returned to duty, he locked those emotions away, determined to honor his commitment and serve with the professionalism expected of him. That morning, as James took his position at the palace gates, he thought he had his emotions under control. He had stood through worse conditions, through rain and heat and cold. He could stand through grief too. But then a song started playing from a nearby tourist's phone, a song that had been Michael's favorite. The melody hit James like a physical blow, and before he could stop it, tears began forming in his eyes. He fought against them, using every technique he had learned to maintain his composure. But a few escaped, despite his best efforts. James had been silently berating himself for the weakness, for letting his emotions show while on duty. He worried that his commanding officers might see that his fellow guards might think less of him. He felt isolated in his grief, surrounded by thousands of people, but utterly alone with his pain. The tourists laughing and taking photos seemed to mock his sorrow, though he knew they meant no harm. They were just living their lives, unaware of the broken man standing before them in a perfect uniform. Then he saw the little girl approaching. At first, James assumed she was just another child coming to stare at the funny guard or try to make him laugh. He had experienced countless such encounters over the years and had perfected the art of remaining stoic regardless of what people did. But something about this child was different. She moved with purpose, but also with hesitation, as if she understood the gravity of what she was doing. When Emma placed the teddy bear at his feet and stepped back to salute, James felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. When she spoke, telling him she could see his sadness and offering her most precious possession to comfort him. Something inside James broke open. Here was this tiny girl, this stranger from halfway around the world, showing him more compassion than he had shown himself. She saw his pain, acknowledged it, and offered help without judgment or expectation. James wanted to break protocol, to kneel down and hug this remarkable child who had seen straight into his soul. He wanted to thank her, to tell her about Michael and how much her gesture meant. But his training held firm. He could not move, could not speak, could not do anything that would compromise his duty. All he could do was shift his eyes downward for a brief moment, looking at the small teddy bear that now sat in guard with him, and let his heart fill with a warmth he had not felt since before. Michael's death. The hours that followed were different for James. He remained at his post, standing with the same rigid posture and blank expression required of him. But inside everything had changed. Every time his eyes flicked downward and he saw Mr. Button sitting there, he felt a wave of comfort wash over him. The teddy bear became a symbol of something larger than itself. It represented kindness, compassion, and the idea that even in his darkest moment, someone cared. James began to think about what Emma had said. She told him nobody should have to be sad alone, and she was right. He had been isolating himself in his grief, pushing away his fellow guards when they tried to check on him, keeping his family at arm's length because he did not want to burden them further. Michael's death had left him feeling like he had to be strong for everyone else, that showing his pain was somehow a betrayal of his brother's memory. But this little girl had shown him that strength could also mean accepting help, accepting love. Other guards rotated through their positions throughout the day, and each one noticed the teddy bear at James's feet. His fellow guards knew about Michael's death, and they had been worried about James since his return to duty. They had seen the cracks in his armor, the moments when his eyes seemed far away and filled with sorrow. When they saw the teddy bear and heard the story from tourists who had witnessed Emma's gesture, they understood something profound had happened. During his break, James was finally able to step away from his post. He carefully picked up Mr. Button's, holding the worn teddy bear in his large hands. His commanding officer approached him, a stern-looking man named Captain Richards, who had served for 20 years. James tensed, expecting a reprimand for the distraction at his post. Instead, Captain Richards placed a hand on James's shoulder and told him he had heard what happened. The captain's voice was gentler than James had ever heard it, as he said that sometimes the universe sends us exactly what we need at exactly the right moment. Captain Richards shared that he had lost his own brother years earlier and understood the weight James was carrying. He told James that being a good guard did not mean being inhuman, that the uniform did not erase the man underneath. He encouraged James to talk to the military counselor, to let his friends and family help carry the burden of grief. Then he did something unexpected. He told James to take the rest of the day off, to find the little girl if he could, and properly thank her for her kindness. James did not have to search long. The Mitchell family had spent the day touring London, but they returned to the palace in the late afternoon. Emma had been worried about Mr. Buttons all day, hoping the guard was feeling better, but also missing her beloved companion. As they approached the palace gates, Emma's eyes immediately searched for the guard she had helped that morning. She was disappointed to see a different guard standing in his place. With no sign of Mr. Buttons, Sarah suggested they ask one of the palace staff about the teddy bear, worried it might have been discarded as lost property. David agreed, and they approached the guard station to inquire. Before they could speak, however, a voice called out behind them. They turned to see James Harrison, now out of his ceremonial uniform and dressed in regular military attire, walking toward them with Mr. Buttons held carefully in his hands. Emma's face lit up with joy and relief. She ran toward James, then stopped a few feet away, suddenly shy. James knelt down to her level, bringing himself to her height. His eyes were red from crying, but they were also brighter than they had been that morning, filled with gratitude and genuine warmth. He held out Mr. Buttons to Emma, and she took him gently, hugging the teddy bear to her chest. James's voice was thick with emotion as he spoke. He thanked Emma for what she had done, telling her she had helped him more than she could possibly understand. He explained that he had been very sad because someone he loved very much had gone to heaven. and he had been trying to be brave by hiding his feelings. But Emma had shown him that being brave sometimes meant letting others see. When you were hurting and accepting their help, Emma listened carefully, her young face serious and understanding. She told James she was sorry about the person who went to heaven, and she knew how hard that was because her grandmother had gone to heaven too. She said that was why Mr. Buttons was so special, because he carried all the love her grandmother had given her. She hoped some of that love had helped James today. Then she did something that surprised everyone. She held Mr. Buttons out to James and told him to keep the teddy bear for a little while longer if he needed to. James felt tears streaming down his face, no longer trying to hold them back. He gently pushed Mr. Buttons back toward Emma, telling her that while he was deeply touched by her offer, she should keep her grandmother's gift. What she had given him that morning was something even more valuable than the teddy bear itself. She had given him permission to grieve, to be human, and to accept kindness from others. That gift would stay with him forever. David and Sarah watched this exchange with their own tears falling freely. Sarah pulled out a tissue, dabbing at her eyes while David wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They had always known their daughter was special, but seeing the impact of her compassion on this grieving man made them incredibly proud. They also felt humbled by the reminder that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness could change someone's entire day, or even their life. James reached into his pocket and pulled out something he had prepared during his break. It was a small pin bearing the insignia of the Royal Guard, something typically given only to fellow service members. He explained to Emma that he wanted her to have it as a thank you for her kindness. He told her that whenever she looked at it, she should remember that she had made a real difference today, that her compassion had helped a stranger find hope again in a dark time. Emma accepted the pin with reverence, holding it carefully in her palm. She asked James if this meant she was like an honorary guard now. James smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his entire face, and told her that she was better than a guard. She was a guardian of kindness, someone who protected people's hearts instead of palaces. He said the world needed more people like her. People who noticed when others were hurting and were not afraid to reach out with love. The four of them talked for a while longer, standing together as the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky. James told them about Michael, sharing stories of their childhood and the bond they had shared. Emma listened intently, sometimes asking questions, other times just offering her small hand to hold. She understood loss in her own way, and her presence was comforting without being intrusive. David and Sarah added their own condolences, sharing briefly about Sarah's mother and how Emma had struggled after her death. James found himself opening up in a way he had not been able to since Michael's funeral. There was something about this family, particularly this remarkable little girl, that made him feel safe to be vulnerable. They did not judge him for his tears or tell him to be strong. They simply listened, offered comfort, and shared their own experiences with grief. It was exactly what James needed, though he had not known it until that moment. As their conversation continued, other tourists began to notice and approach. Word had spread through social media about the little girl who had made a royal guard cry. Several people wanted to meet Emma and thank her for restoring their faith in humanity. Emma handled the attention with grace, always redirecting the focus back to James and making sure people understood that he was going through a hard time and deserved kindness. One tourist, a photographer named Marcus, had captured the moment when Emma placed Mr. Buttons at James's feet that morning. He showed them the photos on his camera, and they were breathtaking. The images perfectly captured the innocence and compassion on Emma's face, the slight softening in James's eyes, and the powerful symbolism of the small teddy bear sitting before the towering guard. Marcus asked if he could share the photos with a news outlet. Believing the story deserved to be told, David and Sarah were hesitant at first, not wanting to exploit their daughter's kind act or invade James's privacy during his grief. But James surprised them by saying he thought it was a good idea. He explained that Michael had always believed in spreading positivity and light in the world, and this story embodied those values. If sharing it could inspire others to show kindness to strangers, or help someone else who was grieving feel less alone, then Michael would have wanted that. Emma was asked how she felt about her photo being in the newspaper. She thought about it seriously for a moment, then said she did not care about being famous. but she thought it would be nice if the story helped other people remember to be kind. She added that maybe if people saw what happened, they would notice when others were sad and try to help them too. Just like she had helped James, her simple wisdom left the adults around her speechless. As evening approached, the Mitchell family needed to return to their hotel. They were scheduled to fly back to Australia in 2 days, and they still had other sights to see in London. Emma gave James one more hug, a long one where she whispered that she would remember him and pray that his heart would not hurt so much. James hugged her back gently, thanking her again and telling her he would never forget what she had done for him. Before they parted, James asked if he could stay in touch with the family. He wanted to write to Emma, to let her know how he was doing and to continue the friendship they had started. David readily agreed, exchanging email addresses and phone numbers with James. Sarah mentioned they would love to hear from him and that Emma would be thrilled to have a pen pal who was a real royal guard. The next morning, the photo of Emma and James was on the front page of several newspapers. The headline read something along the lines of how a little girl's kindness had touched a nation's heart. The story spread rapidly across social media, being shared millions of times within hours. People from around the world commented on the photo, sharing their own stories of loss and kindness. Creating a wave of compassion that rippled far beyond London, James woke to hundreds of messages from people, expressing their condolences for Michael and thanking him for his service. Many shared how Emma's gesture had inspired them to reach out to someone they knew who was struggling, or to accept help they had been too proud to ask for. The story was resonating with people because it reminded them of a fundamental truth that often gets forgotten in the rush of daily life. We are all human, we all hurt sometimes, we all need each other. Emma became somewhat of a small celebrity in her school back in Australia. When she returned, her teachers had seen the story and organized a special assembly where Emma could share her experience. She stood in front of her classmates, still just 7 years old, and told them about meeting James and how she could tell he was sad. She explained that she had given him Mr. Buttons because that was what her heart told her to do, and she encouraged everyone to listen to their hearts when they saw someone who needed help. Her simple message had a profound impact on the school community. Teachers reported an increase in acts of kindness among students. Children who had previously been focused on themselves began noticing when their classmates were upset and offering comfort. Bullying incidents decreased as students remembered Emma's example of compassion. The principal even established a kindness award in Emma's honor. Given monthly to a student who showed exceptional empathy and care for others, James kept his promise to stay in touch with the Mitchell family. He sent Emma regular letters, written by hand, because he thought it was more special than email. In his letters, he told her about his day, about the other guards he worked with, and about how he was learning to cope with Michael's death. He followed the advice Captain Richards had given him and started seeing a counselor who specialized in grief. He reconnected with his family and friends, allowing them to support him through his darkest days. Emma wrote back faithfully. Her letters filled with drawings and stories about school and her adventures. She always asked how James was feeling and reminded him that it was okay to be sad sometimes. She told him about the kindness award at her school and how she had encouraged her friends to always notice when someone needed help. She signed every letter with the same message, telling James that Mr. Buttons sent his love and that her grandmother in heaven is probably watching over both of them now. 6 months after their first meeting, James arranged to visit Australia during his leave. The Mitchell family welcomed him warmly, treating him like a member of their own family. Emma was thrilled to show James her room, her school, and all her favorite places. They visited Sarah's mother's grave together, where Emma introduced James to her grandmother and told her all about the friends she had made. James laid flowers at the grave, thanking a woman he never met for raising such a compassionate granddaughter. During his visit, James met with Emma's school and gave a presentation about his experience. He talked openly about grief, about the importance of asking for help, and about how one small act of kindness had changed his life. He showed the students the route he walked every day at the palace and explained what the job of a royal guard really meant. But mostly, he talked about Emma and how her courage to follow her heart had taught him that vulnerability was not weakness, but rather the truest form of strength. The local news covered James's visit, and the story of Emma and the royal guard found new life. This time, The focus was on how their friendship had continued and grown, proving that genuine human connections could transcend distance and circumstance. Mental health organizations began using their story in campaigns to reduce stigma around grief and emotional vulnerability, particularly among men and those in military service. James used his platform to honor Michael's memory by starting a charity in his brother's name. The organization provided support to families dealing with sudden loss and funded mental health resources for military personnel. Emma became the charity's youngest ambassador, helping to organize kindness campaigns in schools across Australia. The charity grew rapidly, supported by people who had been moved by Emma's original gesture and wanted to create more kindness in the world. Years passed, and Emma and James remained close friends. She grew from a 7-year-old girl into a young woman, but she never lost the compassion that had defined her since childhood. She often thought about that day at the palace, about how following her heart to help a stranger had not only changed his life, but had also shown her the person she wanted to be. She pursued a career in counseling, wanting to help others the way she had helped James. James eventually left active service with the Royal Guard, but continued working in veteran support services. He married and had children of his own. He told them the story of how a little girl from Australia had saved him when he was drowning in grief. He taught his children the lessons Emma had taught him, that kindness was the most powerful force in the world, that noticing others' pain was a gift, and that small gestures could create enormous change. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Emma and James reunited at the palace gates, where their story had begun. They stood together where Emma had once placed Mr. Buttons at James's feet, both older and changed by life, but still connected by that moment of pure compassion. A small memorial plaque had been placed there, reading in honor of all acts of kindness, no matter how small, that remind us of our shared humanity. Tourists passing by had no idea who these two people were or why they stood together. With tears in their eyes and smiles on their faces, they did not know the story of how a 7-year-old girl had seen a stranger's pain and responded with love. Instead of indifference, they did not know how that single moment had rippled outward, touching thousands of lives and inspiring countless acts of kindness around the world. But Emma and James knew. They knew that on a sunny morning 10 years earlier, something magical had happened. A little girl had trusted her heart. A broken man had accepted an unexpected gift, and 2 lives had been forever changed. They knew that Michael would have loved this story, that he would have been proud of the good that came from his death, and that somewhere, somehow, he was smiling down on them both as they walked away from the palace gates that day. Emma took one last look at the guard standing at attention, wondering if he might be having a hard day too. James noticed her glance and smiled, knowing exactly what she was thinking. Some people were born to spread light in dark places, and Emma Mitchell was one of them. And because she had shared her light with him when he needed it most, James had learned to carry his own light and share it. With others, the story of the little girl and the Royal Guard became more than just a viral moment or a touching news story. It became a reminder that we never truly know what battles others are fighting behind their brave faces. It showed that children often understand the most important truths that adults forget. It proved that kindness costs nothing but can mean everything. And it demonstrated that when we have the courage to reach out to someone in pain, we do not just help them. We help ourselves and everyone else who witnesses or hears about that act of love. Emma still had Mr. Buttons, now even more worn from years of being loved, and James still had the memory of a small teddy bear sitting at his feet, a symbol of hope delivered by the smallest of messengers at exactly the moment he needed it most. Both treasures reminded them daily that the world was full of suffering, but it was also full of people willing to ease that suffering if they only had the courage to try.